Hello and welcome back, everybody, to round 6 of the second weekly of the Eternal Tournament Series Season 3. We are jumping straight into a game here. We got James over here on Traditional Armory, and we have Tricourage on Felon Control, featuring some Shadowlands Feasters, which I am very excited to see. I've been hyped about this card since it got spoiled.
Should be very helpful in this Armory versus Control matchup. Felon Control typically has a pretty hard time against Armory decks. It's one of the primary weaknesses in these slower decks. But now that you have a bunch of units with 5 toughness and a lot of power, it's quite possible that we're going to see Tricourage take some of these games away.
Yeah, this used to be a matchup that was I would have considered very favored for Armory, but not quite as much anymore. Felon definitely has a lot better answers now for Armory, so.
Yeah, this Death Strike here is one potential answer to Statuary Maiden. You could also run out some other cards, but I don't think that Tricourage has a lot of perfect answers for this particular situation. It is nice that he has Champion of Cunning, and the Cunning already has that Aegis, so it looks like a pretty decent startup for Courage if he can deal with the Statuary Maiden and not feel too pressured by it.
Yeah, and we see both players with a somewhat slow opening, but now we're starting to get into the real nitty-gritty of this matchup. We already see this Champion of Cunning down with flying and an Aegis, which is going to be very helpful for Tricourage, preventing this from getting easily removed by James.
Yeah, this thing is just above a lot of the potential Armory threats. It can get killed at 6 by big weapons, but at the moment, it's actually putting a lot of pressure on James. And since the Statuary Maiden is not really able to answer it, he's pretty okay with just leaving his Death Strike up for leader and using it for value when Statuary Maiden gets its weapons.
Yes, very true. And we're seeing Tricourage go ahead and elect to put this Death Strike into the main to keep that up for the moment. And this is going to put Tricourage in a pretty nice little position right here. Although we do see a Champion of Glory coming down, which is an interesting inclusion in what would be considered traditional Armory list.
Yeah, this is much closer to the new Armory style, the aggro Armory with Champion of Glory, with Stone Scar Mauls and Starsteel Die Shows. I think we call it traditional Armory now just because it's 3 colors, and I'm not sure if that's like a terribly accurate label, but it does look like what we have going on is a lot of units that are creating pressure, while Tricourage is getting those awesome benefits from Champion of Cunning's just consistent shadow buffs.
Yeah, and we see James having to fire off a Vanquish here into the Steward of the Past, which is a nice clean up for him, gives him a cudgel, but he is basically accepting that he's not going to have an answer to this Champion of Cunning for now, or at least a little while. Probably went to fish out an Auric Runehammer, I have to imagine, with that Rise to the Challenge.
Yeah, that seems like the best option against this particular deck. Champion of Cunning is going to get another 7 damage in, so if James decides to pull a Stone Scar Maul or a Starsteel Die Show, that's not going to work out as well. It's got to be Auric Runehammer or nothing.
Yeah, and we'll see if that is what he chose to fetch up. Tricourage still sitting on his Permafrost. Decide what he's going to do with it. Might use it to lock the board down next turn.
There is the Auric Runehammer, 7 damage, and no crackback from the Champion of Chaos. Champion of Chaos is enabling Steward of the Past to be killed by Vanquishes, which is pretty cute. I think that overall that might be a downside in this particular matchup, although the extra damage certainly does count for something when it comes to dealing with the weapons. So it'll be hard to say whether or not that bonus is going to be useful or not. And it largely depends on whether or not he chooses to block this statuary or block this steward with the 5/5.
Yeah, and this is a hard choice for him here. I have to imagine that going to block the 5/5 into the steward, and I mean that supplies James weapons, and more importantly, it's just that the Auric Runehammer is not going away this turn. And no matter how you cut it, this Auric Runehammer is staying put, and that's going to be pretty key for James.
Yeah, I don't like this line of play as much since now he gets to attack with both the 5/5 and the 7-2. I feel like attacking with Steward to force out the Auric Runehammer or force the block from the champion would have gotten him a little bit more in terms of just playability. But instead, James gets to pressure out with Harsh Rule and finish off Tricourage with an exact 7 damage.
Yeah, so that was a very clean game there out of James with that Armory deck going down a little bit low, but not too worried about his life. Everything kind of hitting it. He kind of hit all his cards he needed right on time. Got the Rise of the Challenge, picking up the Auric Runehammer to go ahead and handle the big champion Cunning before it got too late. And then the Vanquish for the first Steward of the Past that got buffed, and the Harsh Rule to clean it up. So very well played out of the Armory deck.
It was a clean match with a lot of like good back and forth. Both players ended up with exactly 3 cards in hand, pretty close to lethal from any number of sources. It's just the Armory deck has a little bit more pressure there, so that ended up being the thing. James now leads 1-0, and we're looking at the sideboard, trying to figure out what's going to come in and what's going to come out.
Yeah, and in James's sideboard, we see a pair of Ruins, Sabotage, a Champion of Glory, another Vanquish, 3 Copperhall Bailiffs, a Plague, a Valkyrie Enforcer, an Auric Runehammer, 2 Rise to the Challenges, a Harsh Rule, and an Icaria. So quite a suite of cards to choose from. Lots of one-ofs.
Meanwhile, on Tricourage's side, we have Sabotages, 2, 1 Annihilate, 2 Backlashes, 2 Feeding Times, a Staff of Stories, 2 of that brand new card straight into Shadow, an Omen, 2 Azindil's Gifts, a Snow Crush Animist, and the Last Word, of course, in case you want to have the last word in this particular matchup. It looks like Tricourage may actually not be making any major sideboard changes.
Yeah, and he may not feel like he needs them particularly for this matchup. Let's check that sideboard and see if there's really anything in here that he would want.
I like Azindil's Gift for dealing with the Smuggler's Stash and like the sort of like heavy armory style that's going on here. I'm not sure if there are any other options that are particularly important.
Yeah, it seems actually he's already may have had this list made, because I definitely noticed that he brought in an extra Feeding Time as well as a pair of Sabotages.
Oh yeah, he's got a pre-created sideboard ready for this exact matchup.
Yeah, which is good for him. Definitely glad those Sabotages are coming in. Also was considering the Backlashes coming in, and it does look like he brought them in, so that will probably be beneficial at certain parts of the matchup. It can be huge to catch a Harsh Rule or a Smuggler Stash with this Backlash.
Yep, catching Smuggler Stash in particular is just extremely critical. The Sabotage here hits Auric Runehammer. It's not the typical Rhino play of going for the Seek power and seeing if you power screw your opponent, but I think it's definitely right here.
Yeah, given how many cards he's holding, you have to imagine that since only 3 of them were spells of the 6, probably got at least 1 or 2 power, so going to go with the safer play and take the Runehammer. And meanwhile, Tricourage is just kind of building towards this Champion of Cunning again.
Yep, and as long as he's got that power up, he can backlash a lot of nasty cards, but most of the stuff that's coming down from James is going to be attachments, so until he gets a better option, things will not go well for him. If James casts a Rise to the Challenge next turn, then Tricourage can actually get a 2-for-1 off of the Backlash where he kills the sword.
Oh, yeah, very true, though. Would have liked to have seen the Rise there from James so that we could have seen that nice line of play out of Tricourage, but James deciding he doesn't need to commit anything to the board. Just going to play it slowly, and unfortunately, this Champion of Cunning coming down naked means it's probably going to get eaten by a Vanquish, although we do just see a 6/6 Throne Ward come down, which is also a pretty scary threat.
And no Vanquish here. A definite setup for just a problem child deck. He can attack with this 5/5 and kill the sword completely, and that'll be pretty helpful for him, but this 6/6 is putting a lot of pressure on his face.
Yeah, it also doesn't feel good, because I think Tricourage would have really liked to put the Vara's Favor into the Throne Warden to go ahead and take this Aegis away, so he can possibly get it under some sort of effect like the Withering Witch.
This
But
is a scary board, though. If James doesn't have an answer to this champion, that champion is just going to get bigger and bigger. And Shadowland's Feaster is now available to protect the champion from any large weapons, which means that Tricourage has a way to clock out in a very short amount of time. I think this actually could swing his way if he can keep the champion alive and get some value out of that Shadowlands Feaster.
yeah, it's an interesting situation of you're going to want to ambush the Shadowlands Feaster to prevent the weapon, but part of you probably wants to play it up front as well. That way you can get the extra buff on it and have it as a 7/6 that can kind of trade around. But he goes for kind of a middle ground play of deciding to pop the Aegis off of the Throne Warden and getting down a 3/4 Withering Witch. Meanwhile, the Champion of Cunning is just buffing itself up and has now left him with a 2-turn clock.
Yeah, this is not a great situation for James. He still doesn't have the answer to Champion of Cunning, so he's just pushing with that 6 damage a turn, which certainly scary. I do like this play from Tricourage with the Withering Witch because it leaves Backlash open, and Backlash is one of the big problem child cards here. He can Feeding Time here without really any fear of reprisal. If there were any way to protect the Throne Warden, Backlash is still up. So at this point, the champion is just pressuring out. James needs a way to answer it, and he may not have it.
Yeah, he's going to need like a Sword of the Sky King here. Definitely some sort of large weapon to be able to take care of this. And with no Rakana Artisans being played and no buffs, yeah, unfortunately, that's going to do it. So Tricourage being able to take a game back there pretty easily, and definitely seeing the power of the Champion of Cunning evening that matchup right there.
Yeah, Shadowland's Feaster didn't come down, but its presence was felt. Having that many big units against Armory, just again, really, really useful. It was good for him to have that many options. And combined with the backlashes, Tricourage now has a pretty good chance of taking this to a 2-1.
Yeah, very true. And we will see if he can get there. And this is going to be interesting. I'm definitely liking the new inclusion film, even if we didn't see the Feaster come out. I can imagine the impact it would have had if he had played a weapon. For example, if then Auric Runehammer had been buffed to a 5/2 and he had tried to swing at the Champion of Cunning, being able to jump the Feaster in and eat that cleanly.
Yeah, so Tricourage's hand looks pretty strong. You've got Annihilate into Felon Bloodcaster. This isn't great against the Armory style, but Felon Bloodcaster can hold its own against Auric Runehammers and Sword of Icarias. And James hasn't actually shown any red yet, so he might be in some amount of trouble.
Yeah, we'll see if he can pick up a Fire Sigil and actually get some of his cards down. And indeed, he does have a Fire Sigil, so all of his cards should be online at this point. Minus Icaria, of course.
Yep. With this Primal here, Tricourage is hoping to get 5 and hoping to get 5 in Primal so that he can get Champion down with an Aegis on it. He might not actually want to cast the Champion if he doesn't have the Aegis. Suffocate here is a perfect answer to that Statuary Maiden. So
Yeah.
overall, Tricourage's hand is looking pretty solid against this deck.
Yeah, it definitely is. And the Suffocate cleaning up the Statuary Maiden is going to be huge, as well as that Wisdom off the top of Tricourage's deck, drawing him 2 more cards. And he does pick up a Primal Sigil, so the Champion of Cunning can come down next turn if the board permits it as a flying Aegis unit. And that is the exact kind of protection that card needs.
Yep, and he doesn't have to make the hard choice of whether or not he wants to draw his 6th power or play the champion. So with a Torch probably leading up to a Vanquish or a Harsh Roll, James should be able to take control of this board again. But Black Sky Harbinger is a reasonable play here that will still dodge Auric Runehammer and the like.
Yeah, and this is an interesting position as well, because you almost like, it's a really greedy line to take, but given that you've just seen a Torch come down, I feel like you might be able to get away with the Staff of Stories. It's got to be a die show to actually clear it, I think.
Yeah, Black Sky Harbinger, you can play that into a die show and get that 1 damage against weapons. So I kind of like that. I think that Staff of Stories is just a pretty weak card to have here. He should maybe have sideboarded it out, since Auric Runehammer is a very, very common answer, and there's the Torch. But yeah, James doesn't have to trade here, and now Staff of Stories is maybe not as good. But Black Sky Harbinger number 2, picking it up.
Yeah, and now the staff should definitely be able to be established on the following turn, unless James has something big here. And Valkyrie Enforcer, not a terrible pickup, but
you're in a tricky position here where you can't really play staff and annihilate in the same turn. So it might be better to wisdom and use Vara's favor annihilate this turn just to pick up some power.
yeah, and we see Tricourage ripping off just straight gas from his deck, getting this Champion of Cunning and a third Black Sky Harbinger. He's going to be able to put James under a lot of pressure, and this is going to come down to what James, as the Armory player, can actually find to mount a defensive here.
Yeah, I'm not sure if I like using that annihilate this early on the Valkyrie Enforcer. It's not a large threat for Tricourage, and there's the Smuggler's Stash, so he does actually get some serious benefit out of bringing that card back. We get an Auric Rune Hammer, a Statuary Maiden, and I believe that's the only weapon that James gets. So a 3-for-1 card advantage out of Smuggler's Stash. And Tricourage is in a little bit more trouble because of that extensive card draw.
Yeah, James was able to get a bunch of cards, which was very key here. My concern with him, honestly, is that I don't know if it's going to be enough, really. Like, James is at 6 power, and he's going to have to... Okay, so this is another Torch rule. Okay, so he spends his whole turn doing the Torch Harsh rule play. And then what comes next? Because we've seen most of... at least 2 or maybe 3 Torches now out of James. So we're going to see him drop this Auric Runehammer, probably try and punch face, and then get met with the Shadowlands Feaster, and more than likely not have a way to clean it. Oh, and this is even better. Doesn't even put the weapon down, so he's guaranteed to take the 5, and a second Shadowlands Feaster off the top of the deck.
Yeah, this is interesting here. Tricourage doesn't have a way to clear that Statuary Maiden, so he could potentially lose the Shadowlands Feaster here and give his opponent a cudgel, but I think he's pretty close to lethal.
I actually... This line of play is okay, but I actually think he was guaranteed game here, really. Like, I think there was a way with the Shadowlands Feaster ambush. James doesn't have any big weapons. He only has the Auric Runehammer to play. I think he could have afforded to wait for this harsh rule to come out, followed up with the Shadowlands Feaster ambush to deal 5 damage, and then you had 2 Vara's favors to ping, which was 7, which was what James was sitting at.
Yeah, and if you're throwing out those Vara's favors, like that's going to be fine because you still have Black Sky Harbinger to clear the Runehammer. Tricourage isn't playing his cards efficiently. He's playing for lethal, and that's decent. He might get it, but he's also starting to run a little bit lower on cards than James.
Yeah, it's going to come down to how well he can weave in this Shadowlands Feaster. If James opens himself up at all, like this might be it, because James is going to need some direct removal to answer this. And yeah, I think you're just going to pass, jump your Shadowlands Feaster in, clean this weapon off, and I mean, Tricourage is in a pretty decent position, all things considered. Like,
he can Death Strike the Valkyrie Enforcer to get it basically on his board, and he still gets to play Staff here, which is just, yeah, pretty effective. This gives James several threats that he has to answer. That's lethal with Vara's favor.
Yeah.
But it does get rid of the Shadowlands Feaster.
It does get rid of the Shadowlands Feaster, but James is going to have to establish another weapon or heal, or he is just dead to this Vara's favor. Deathstrike cleaning this up, which isn't even really necessary at this point, but definitely the correct play. And now we're going to see Tricourage go ahead and take it back. So Feln being able to take it 2-1 against Armory.
Yeah, not bad. All right, so yeah, we saw some pretty strong Shadowlands Feaster plays there. Definitely the Feln deck got to be a little bit aggressive and put some beat down on the deck. So it's nice to see Feln with a couple of those big units in there and doing the kind of stuff that it really, really wants to do. Yeah, like a pretty good game. Good example of how Shadowlands Feaster can be sided in the meta and pushed in the meta to deal with some different types of decks.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm really happy to see Shadowlands Feaster there, and really happy to see it perform quite well, actually. Like that card was very, very good in that matchup. I mean, the 5/6 body itself is often generally very awkward.
Well, that's really all that Feln is playing it for. There's no actual recursion in the Feln control deck.
Yeah, you're just playing it for the body. Like, and the ambush is so good. I mean, having ambush on something that big is very useful for Feln. I mean, it gives them those outs like we just saw, where you just kind of hang back, and then all of a sudden, boom, out of nowhere, you drop in a big flying 5/6, and your opponent just kind of stares at it, and they're like, "Oh, well, that's unfortunate. Didn't see that one coming down."
Yeah, I think we've got a film mid-range archetype available now, and that's pretty cool. It still plays very, very control heavy because it's film, but it's a good thing to see, and it's good to see Tricourage, who is going 5-1 and should be in the quarterfinals.
Yeah, he definitely should be. That, I believe, was his winning in, so he is definitely guaranteed in. At 4-2, his opponent James actually has a chance to get in still. So that will come down to tie breaks, I believe. But
Yep. Gonna be tough, but he has a chance.
yeah, it will be possible. But in the meantime, I think that will do it for us, and we will reconvene here at the top 8.
See you guys in quarterfinals.
All right.